lecture on civil liberties. I'm going to break up the talk into three separate videos. The first will be on the introduction to the civil liberty issues, and we will focus on the freedom of speech and the related cases, interpretation of the First Amendment rights. And the second part of the video will focus on freedom of religion and interpretation of the free exercise clause and establishment clause. And the lesson video 3 will focus on the due process of laws and the Fourth Amendment all the way to Eighth Amendment. So let's start with the first video now. So chapter 11 talk about the civil liberty and civil rights issues. We will let you to read the rest of the segments on the civil rights issues, and we'll focus mostly on the interpretation of civil liberties and the Bill of Rights. So in this lecture, you want to focus on a number of issues. And let me start with my PowerPoint slide sharing. So we'll first look at the Bill of Rights and see what are the specific rights that are protected by each of the major amendments. And secondly, we're going to look at some of the court interpretations and some of the landmark decisions made by the court. And thirdly, we're going to look at some of the controversial issues regarding to how to apply those rights. And first, let's clarify the concept of civil liberties. And we, in our daily conversation, we use the words natural rights and civil liberties. So it is necessary for us to have a clear understanding of the differences between among those concepts. So civil liberties are part of the natural rights. They are the rights based on the individuals. So they are reflected in the Bill of Rights. So basically, civil liberties are all the fundamental liberties and individual freedom that are mentioned in the Bill of Rights, or even not mentioned in the Bill of Rights, such as freedom of speech and freedom of religion, freedom to have a fair trial, public trial. So all of those are protected in the Bill of Rights. The civil liberties are specific individual rights that are constitutionally protected against infringement by a government. Now, civil rights are those rights to be defined by a person's group affiliations. For example, if you are a U.S. citizen, you are entitled to the right to vote. And if you're not a U.S. citizen, you don't have a right to vote. The right to vote is a civil rights issue, not a civil liberty issue. The undocumented aliens or illegal immigrants who live in the United States, they don't have lots of civil rights guaranteed as a citizen, but they do enjoy, some of the constitutionally protected civil liberties, such as right to have attorney, freedom of speech. Those are guaranteed to individuals, whether you're a citizen or not. Okay, so these are the differences. And secondly, in the rights of in the civil rights case, you're actually inviting more government interferences and trying to extend the equal protections against any discriminations. So we have, witnessed many of the civil rights movement, which demand government action to extend the universal suffrage, to protect the equal rights against the racial discrimination against the gender discrimination. So those are the civil rights issues. And so we will basically only focus on civil liberty issues in this particular videos. Three comments here when we talk about individual freedoms. First, there's no such thing as absolute right. You have freedom of speech, you have freedom of religion. It doesn't necessarily mean you have freedom to say anything. You have freedom to do anything. You have freedom of religion doesn't necessarily mean you can exercise whatever religious teaching that you get from your religion. So there are some limits. Okay, there are various restrictions and regulations on the time, place, manner of exercising those rights. And secondly, we need a government to protect our freedoms. And quite often, the exercise of one person's freedom can get the way of your rights to do things. So that's where the government come into place, and to maintain peace and to keep a proper balance between everybody's rights. And in this regard, you have a freedom to march, to demonstrate, but you're not allowed to block the traffic and to cause congestions and leading you to miss your work. So that's not allowed. So demonstrators will have to apply for a permit to be assigned at a time slot and a place where they can hold their public gatherings or march. At the same time, we also want to protect the commuters' right to go to work, to use public roads. So everybody's freedom will be protected. Sometimes we need to make a compromise in order to protect everybody's rights. And finally, some rights are protected and there are some rights that are not protected. In terms of your thought, thinking, you have absolute freedom. But in terms of speech, expression, and take action, and that's where you might see some of the restrictions, because action is more than a words, a speech. It can have consequences, and so the government have an interest to protect the public from being harmed. So let's go back to the Bill of Rights. Here is a summary of all the key elements in each of the first 10 amendments. So First Amendment protect our freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. And Second Amendment protect people's right to bear arms. And Third Amendment talk about, military should not use the civilian residents during the wartime. And from the Fourth to Eighth Amendment, they deal with the criminal justice system in this country. It provides all the procedural rights for the suspect, or for people who are being charged with violating laws. So the Fourth Amendment talk about the people have freedom from unreasonable search and seizures. Again, it's our right, not subject to a government random search or arbitrary search. And Fifth Amendment talk about the due process of law, freedom of being engaged in self-incrimination, the right to remain silent, not subject to double jeopardy, so on and so forth. Double jeopardy means a person cannot be tried twice for the same charges a person was prosecuted for. If the court found somebody not guilty, then he will not facing a second trial for the same charge. And there's no self-incrimination means that the person has a right to remain silent. He doesn't have to confess. He or she does not have to, prove he's guilty. To help the police. The Sixth Amendment talk about the accused person have a right to a speedy and a public trial, have a right to have attorneys. The Seventh Amendment talk about a trial by jury in civil cases, and the Eighth Amendment talk about the punishing phase of the criminal or even the civil cases, where there should be no excessive bails and fines, and there should be no cruel and unusual punishments. So even a person was found guilty and liable, they're still protected. So that from the Fourth through Eighth Amendment, they deal with every steps of the due process procedures. So in the first video clips, we'll look at the freedom of speech, freedom of expression. So I had extensive discussion about the freedom of speech already. So when dealing with what government can do with people's speech, free speech rights, the court has set a number of guidelines. It's interesting to look at each one of them. The preferred position means that when not every rights are created equal, and freedom of speech is supposed to be given a higher or even the highest position in all protections. So government should try everything possible and not infringe upon people's right to free speech. And one such a requirement is that there should be no prior restraint. The government cannot tell speakers what not to say before the speaker actually says it. Okay, so if the government does it, it's called a censorship. So we prohibit the government from censoring our speech ahead of our speaking or writing. And sometimes government do have the interest in make sure there will be peace. So if somebody's speech might flare up and become incitement, get agitated, it might cause imminent disorder. So imminent danger doctrine will prevent the government or police from intervening if somebody's speech might cause immediate lawlessness. And the principle of neutrality means that when government has to regulate speech, it must be content neutral. It cannot be targeting a specific group of people. So if you apply to everybody. Okay. And clarity is a requirement that when government does pass a law to regulate the time, place, manner of a speech, and the regulation must be clear and without too much ambiguities, so it's easy to follow. And these means, meaning that if restriction has to be placed, it must be not causing excessive amount of burden on the speakers and make it hard to comply. If government does that, it literally make the speech inconvenient and burdensome. So that's why the court does not like government regulation put too much burden on speech. So if you read the First Amendment, they talk about freedom of religion. They talk about government should not make laws abridging the freedom of speech, press, peaceful assembly, petition, so on and so forth. So we talk about 5 fundamental rights here: freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, a petition, and freedom of associations. So all of those are the important part of First Amendment. They are serving as the core value in our democracies, and that's pretty much set us apart from any other authoritarian government. So when you make a speech, if you're agreeing with the government, nobody have trouble, give you trouble. But the key test of true political freedom is a political speech. What if you disagree with the government? And what if you are a opposition? You stand up against a political party. You stand up against the government public policies. So this is all under the category of political speech. So what good thing, what the great about this country is that people dare to disagree, and people can openly express their disagreement, and they can lobby for their own values. They can protest against the government. So that's all of your freedom. If you're not allowed to express your dissenting views, and what kind of freedom is that? And sometimes people may express their opinions through various ways. Symbolic speech is one of them. Symbolic speech usually involves using of mixed elements of conduct, speeches, and actions. Okay, and we heard some example like people burning draft car, people burning American flags. So this is not a speech; it's more towards the action, right? But it is expression of their political discontent. So in terms of those kind of symbolic speeches, not all of them are equally protected. In Texas, was the Johnson case in 1989. The court actually ruled that the burning of American flag during a protest was constitutionally protected. Okay, so if you look at all states' laws, there are specific laws that prohibit citizens from burning American flags because it's such a sacred symbol of the nation. But the court is willing to support people's expression, especially express their political dissenting opinions by causing traumatic reaction to it, like burning American flags. So the court actually had no trouble with it, and they said that's a part of the freedom of speech. It should be protected. But historically, there have been situations the court is clear that they are not protected speech and can be regulated and prohibited. And defamation, such as libel and slander, is something that you can be held liable, accountable for. A libel is a written, untruthful statement, and slander is a verbal expression of a false statement. So the person have freedom to say whatever they want to say, but if they know something that is false and they insist on saying it with an bad intention to cause harm to another person's reputation or characters, and this is clearly a unacceptable behaviors. It's not a protected speech, and it can be fined by the court. Now, the adult content. In terms of the content, they are protected. So in this country, there's still a adult industry, and we still see some legally produced adult movies, R-rated, X-rated, pornographic stuff. They are legally produced. They are sold in the adult video store, sold online, but there are a lot more restrictions on that kind of materials. And many of the laws are created to protect the underage children for accessing those materials. So there are heavy restrictions in terms of time, place, manner being placed on obscene materials. And when you testify in the court, you're swear to tell the truth, and you can be held liable if you perjure yourself, which means you're lying in the court. Profanity is another big issue. People sometimes express themselves with anger, with emotion. They can use foul language, curse words. We're adults. We have emotion, so we sometimes saying things just nasty. Does the freedom of speech allow those kind of a foul language in one's speech? I guess most part, yes. The court is agree that people can use some of the foul language during their speeches. But when those speeches are being made on the public airspace, and then you're gonna have a lot of minors who will be exposed to it. So that's where you see a lot of regulations on the time, manner such content can be aired, can be displayed. So we see a lot of the television station had to block the words certain presenters making. The television station may not be able to show R-rated movies before 10 p.m. So those kind of things relate to the profanity, that kind of stuff. Hate speech, that's a relatively new category. If one person, making a hate speech, that usually refer that person making some derogatory comment, going to cause the audience to feel personally threatened or psychologically fearful. And that can be classified as a hate speech, and the speaker can be held liable for that. Fighting words. So, when you express yourself, and sometimes the words can cause consequences. There are cases like somebody yell fire in a crowded theater, and which can cause public panic and can lead to a stampede, killing one another. So that's not allowed. If you joking around like this, you can be arrested. If you go through airport security check and you yell bomb, and that's a threat, and then you can be quickly subdued by the TSA. Others are obvious, like sedition and treason. You can now endanger national security, selling national secrecy, acting like a spy or espionage to harm this country. So no country allows that. Sedition and treason are always punishable. So let's take a look at some of the landmark decisions. On the issue of obscenity, Americans actually are becoming more and more tolerant. The definition of obscenity are ever changing. So how do you define something? It is obscene, just subject to some kind of censorship. So that's what the judge is trying to answer in Miller versus California case. So in this case, and the court set a three-part test, which commonly called Miller test. Number one, the hardcore pornography test. If the materials only appeal to the reader's audience with offensive sexual content, and then it is hardcore pornography and can be banned, can be regulated. And number two, community standard, meaning that local people should make their own judgment. If a piece of art have some sexual content on the picture, on the artwork, if it displays in a museum in New York City and nobody found offensive, so be it. That's not obscene. But if the same piece of work was displayed in Georgia somewhere and people were extremely offended by that, and yeah, they can define this one as obscene and therefore barred from being displayed somewhere in the museum. So this is all based on the community standard. The third is called the SLAPS test. And so SLAPS spells as whether or not a piece of work demonstrates any serious literary, artistic, political, and scientific values. Like a nudity itself is not necessarily obscene. If you're doing an anatomy class and you have a human cadaver naked display in the classroom, that's not obscene. It's a scientific research. If you having a art drawing class, you have a naked human model sitting in front of a classroom, and that's not obscene, and that's art appreciation. So that's where you should apply SLAPS test. Okay, so Miller test is created by Miller was a California. It's an effort trying to define what is obscene and what is not. And in terms of libel, slander, we have many cases in New York Times versus Sullivan case decided in 1964. And the court demand that to show somebody has committed libel, you have to show a proof of actual malice, meaning that you have to demonstrate that person is knowingly, distributed the false statement with an evil intention to tarnish somebody's reputation. So that's kind of hard to prove, but it's the key to winning any libel or slander cases. All right, I'll stop the recording now and try to make the video short, and we'll continue next one on the freedom of religion.